interesting. By the way,
I want to take the golf course that that Saudi Prince controls now,
okay.
and cut it in half and make an RV park for it,
Okay.
for them, and do it first class. And then because AI is going to solve
Because what?
AI is going to solve poverty within 10 years, and then we'll have four. I want one on each golf course. It takes 62 acres to make one.
Okay.
And then and two on Treasure Island. So that's 4,000 spots, and we can rent them to all these people who are living on UBI.
Okay.
I'll be 81 next month, and I'm a retired farm school teacher. I haven't had a job in 18 years.
Yeah.
And people think that people are afraid of people not having anything to do. I don't waste a minute. You know?
Great, thank you. So today is the big day. An hour and a half ago, the updated zoning map got released. So I think, is this the first public event with the new event? You folks are the privy few who are getting to see the new map. So let's start off with context. What does a zoning map do? How did we get here? When's the last time that we had one of these? And then when this is adopted, what happens to our city skyline? Do we immediately see a lot of construction overnight, or is this something we're going to be talking about again in 10, 20 years?
Cool. Good question. First of all, my site was less than Penny.
Oh, yeah.
Built with the unlucky Penny. So what does the zoning map do? It basically tells project sponsors, developers, homeowners, what they could build on their site. And, you know, the big factors that go into a zoning map are height. How much height do we allow you to build on that site? Density, how many units you could put into that height. And we also control, there's some bulk controls, like we require generally a 30% rear yard. So you can't cover your entire lot with a housing project. You gotta leave some space, some open space for a rear yard. And then we control sometimes how many units you can build in that, but we're actually moving away from that, and that's called density control, where we kind of require a certain, or we cap the number of units you could actually put in a building on that site. We've rezoned, you know, a decent amount over the last, and if you pop up that next map, which shows that's the rezoning map, but this one, we've primarily done rezonings in the eastern portion of the city, so the red, orange shades that are there. Some more broader area plans like eastern neighborhoods, which looked at parts of the Mission, south of Market, down towards Dog Patch. There were area plans like Market Octavia, which was kind of driven by the city and citizens wanting to tear down the former freeway on Octavia Boulevard, but we looked at rezoning up Market Street to Castro. We've done specific area plans with property owners like Mission Bay, where there was one property owner and we entered into an agreement with them to rezone, or the Potrero power plant. But most of this has been on the eastern side of the city. We've taken former industrial areas and created new neighborhoods, or created housing sites in what were, you know, primarily industrial portions of the city. So it's generally worked. You know, that's where most of our housing has been produced. So 90% of the housing, I can't remember the exact date, that we've built in the last couple decades has been on the eastern side of the city. So you might think like Geary, you may think like Geary Boulevard. Why is nobody building on Geary Boulevard? Why are they only building on Valencia or 3rd Street and Dog Patch? It's because the zoning is different. You're fairly limited on Geary. The height is 40 feet currently on Geary. We cap the density on Geary. So generally you can't even fill that 40-foot box on Geary with units. The zoning's very much different in parts of the eastern side of the city, on Hayes Street, on Upper Market, on 3rd Street, where we've increased heights and we've basically taken away density controls. You can put as many units generally as you'd like in that massing. We're controlling for kind of what a building looks like from the street. It's kind of mass and form, not necessarily how many units are in it. So that's where we've mostly been. You know, and I remember when I started working for the city 30 years ago, people were talking like, we need more housing on Geary, we need to see more housing on Lombard. And nothing really happened in those areas of the city until the state came and said, we want to see, we do what's called a house, and if I'm blathering here and you want to answer more questions, do you want to?
Bring your mic up.
Yeah, sorry. So the state has come and said, you know, the state's got a housing crisis, so we want to see jurisdictions build more housing, and they've given us targets that many will say are, you know, impossible or extremely difficult to achieve. They're about 10,000 units per year. We've generally only built about 3,000 units per year. Our high water mark is about 5,000 units per year in some good times when the economy is good. So the state has told jurisdictions throughout California, you must build more housing. And they've told us that before, and we've done these housing elements which sound good, like we're gonna rezone, but they're kind of BS. Like most jurisdictions kind of treated it as a paperwork exercise where they did their housing element. There wasn't much, you know, there wasn't teeth to it at the state level. You know, you rezoned a cemetery, or, you know, we rezoned Stonestown or something like that. You know, we really weren't into it. We were just kind of covering the bases and doing some paperwork. So the laws have changed over the last couple of years. You know, I credit Scott Wiener and some of the other housing advocates at the state to do this, that they're checking our work now and making sure that it's meaningful, you know, that it just doesn't say, you know, we want more housing and we're gonna look in these areas. They're having us prove that the rezoning we are doing is actually gonna produce units in, you know, a fairly high number of units that the state has set as our targets. And not only that, they've said, and I'll just finish up with this one point, they've said, we want you to do it in what they call well-resourced neighborhoods. They say, we want you to affirmatively further fair housing. We want you to build in areas of the city where we haven't built. And the state comes up with this map of high resource neighborhoods, and that's the blue portion of this map. And, you know, it's the area of the city we haven't really built much. So it's not necessarily a coincidence, but the state comes up with the blue map. We show you kind of where we've built in the past, and it says, we want to see a lot more housing being built in that part of the city, and you must rezone to accommodate it. So we have to build 80,000 units in the city over an 8-year period, but then if you kind of boil through and do the math, the state wants to see us rezone to accommodate 36,000 units in that blue area of the city.
So you said that the rezoning, like the state's been pushing to make sure that this will produce new housing. So what sort of time scale are we going to see those changes? How fast have these rezonings on the east side resulted in changes? And on the west side, is this something where 5 years from now you expect that suddenly Geary will be a lot of buildings? And then I've seen these like flyers that I've gotten in the mail of like, hey, this is what like Lombard Street could look like with these giant white boxes.
Right.
Are we going to see these masses filled up, or what does that progression look like?
Yeah, first, you know, we haven't changed the zoning on the western side of the city for 50 years. And the last time we did it was in the 70s. It was a down zoning, right? We reduced what you could build in the 70s. So we expect this zoning to be in place for decades, for, you know, to last 30, 40, 50 years. And that housing will be being built as a result of this zoning for the next 50 years. We don't expect everything to happen tomorrow. I mean, obviously housing is built in cycles, it's built during good economic times. So, you know, we hope when economic conditions are more favorable, we'll see housing built. But think like upper market in the Castro, or between Octavia Boulevard in Castro Street on Market Street. There's a decent amount of housing built, but it didn't happen all at once. It happened over time. Generally, it happens on what we call soft sites, where there's a parking lot or a gas station or a single-story commercial building. one of the principles in the housing element in that the city has is, one, we want to protect historic resources, and there's always a debate about what is or is not a historic resource, like that theater in Stonestown. Articles written about it, whether that was a resource or not. But we want to protect historic buildings and we'll landmark them and protect them. We also want to protect existing rent-controlled housing. And the city's done a good job at doing that. In areas we've rezoned, we have not seen, even though what you could build on a site may be significantly more than what exists today, if there's rent-controlled housing in there, the city has kind of opined that we generally want to keep that housing. It's still a discretionary action to demo it. So it's gonna take time to get housing built. It'll be built over time. It's not gonna happen all at once on corridors. Every corridor has commercial with housing above. We generally think those parcels will remain that. They're not gonna be demolished for new housing. But on Geary, there's soft sites. On Lombard, there's soft sites. Even on Haight Street, which is generally built out, there are sites that could accommodate housing. So, we expect this to be built out over years and decades, but this zoning, if history is kind of repeats itself, we know it's gonna be there for years.
And how does this rezoning fit in with the other tools that you folks have been working on to dictate what this will look like in the future? Do developers just have the ability to build anything? Are we gonna see a lot more of discretionary review, which we've been learning about the last couple of nights? Is there like other standards that will shape what the facades will look like, what the frontages will look like, so that people can start understanding what their streets and start imagining what these will look like in the future?
Yeah. So, you can't just come in and build anything. There are rules about parking, there's rules about, commercial on the ground floor, neighborhood commercial corridors, and transparency requirements. The state has been very clear though, that, there are paths now to get projects approved that didn't exist 10 years ago. And I sat on the planning commission before I was the director. In many cases, we heard projects that were code compliant, they all complied with the code, but they needed to be approved by the planning commission. So people came and they didn't like them, or they wanted to be a floor shorter, or they wanted, it to step down in the rear because there were homes behind it. And so there were a lot of fights about projects that were code compliant, even though they abided by the rules. Folks could complain about it and come to the planning commission and argue for changes to a project. And it led to uncertainty in the process. The result may help the person who lived behind it. There may be a step down, and so there's less shadow or impact on a neighbor. But the process was somewhat haphazard. It kind of depended who came to the planning commission or how good their outreach was to lead to a result. But the state rules have changed dramatically to say, if you come in and you're a code compliant project, you abide by the rules. You have the parking requirements, we have the height works, you're leaving a 30% rear yard, you're putting commercial on the ground floor, etc. If you kind of, there are state ministerial, we call them ministerial processes, you can elect to use, which basically says the commission doesn't opine on this. We must approve it if it's code compliant. And so that's beyond the zoning change, that's a dramatic change to how the city approves projects. There's no CEQA, there's no potential for a CEQA appeal, there's no conditional use, there's no potential for a conditional use appeal. So it's a big change to how projects get approved in the city. I don't think we've seen the results of this yet, because the economy, the economic conditions to build housing aren't what they were 8-10 years ago. We're starting to see more projects, and most projects are taking advantage of these rules to say we want a ministerial path to approval. And those projects could be small, 2 units, and they could be large. We recently approved on Howard Street a 70-story building in a couple months, because they use they use the state process to get ministerial approval. Again, they had to abide by our codes. Technically, I mean, there's something called state density bonus too, where you can abide by our codes and then get more on top of that as a result of state density bonus. But, you know, the landscape on how we approve projects has changed dramatically.
First, I'd encourage folks in the back, there's a couple of seats around, then also if you trickle in, there's more easy standing room in that corner around the back. But then building on what you were just saying about the state density bonus, can you talk more about like, how do we ensure that when we're talking with neighbors about this map, like you all are gonna be the experts on the new zoning map. When you're talking to your neighbors and somebody says, hey, I heard about this project out by the zoo. I heard about this project on Sansom Street. I heard about, what was it, like 447 Battery. Like, how do we know that there's not gonna be a change in like the state density bonus laws or other changes in state policy that could like mean that these height limits that we're talking about may get exceeded? How do we make sure this is the future?
And one, we should go to the zoning map, which I think is the next, kind of the proposed zoning map. But one, we can't control what the state does in the future. Like the state gives us the authority to, you know, control land use and zone. It's really a power that the state has that's been delegated to municipalities. And it could take it back. It could say, we're gonna be the you know, the ones who control what gets built or not in the city. So we don't know what may happen in the future, like if units don't get built and jurisdictions aren't abiding by state rules, or, you know, we still find ourselves in a housing crisis, the state may come in and say, we wanna give people 3 times, you know, a density bonus. But we've put together a zoning map that accounts for a state density bonus, right? And so just a quick overview of what this map says, because it's a big portion of the city that we're proposing to rezone. And, you know, we've primarily stayed to commercial corridors to increase heights. So, you know, on streets like Lombard, Geary, 19th Avenue, highly trafficked, there could be transit, I think Judah's on there too, Noriega. We've increased heights 4 stories. So instead of only building 40 feet, we're saying you can build 80 feet. So you can build
4 stories higher than what's generally there currently.
Yeah, I mean, in most of this area currently is all 40-foot zoning. You can only go up 4 floors. So on those kind of wider, transit-oriented commercial corridors, we've added 4 stories to the height. And, you know, you could probably get to 6 stories now with state density bonus. We're allowing you to go to 4 stories. And then in kind of smaller commercial corridors, most of them have less opportunity sites, Haight, 24th Street, Clement. We've added 2 additional stories to the height limit. So you can go to 60 feet. We go to 65 feet to give you kind of a taller ground floor for retail. It generally makes a building better on a commercial corridor. So that's the primary premise to this. Like, I don't think that's outlandish. You know, it's certainly different in some places than what's there today. But, you know, when you boil it down, it's an extra 2 stories or 4 stories in most commercial corridors. We've also removed our density requirements. So within that building envelope, whether it's 8 stories or 6 stories, you can kind of have flexibility in how you want to put units in that building. In some other areas, we have increased the heights more than that 2 or 4 stories, but that's primarily where those heights are already taller. So on Van Ness, between like Broadway and City Hall, we go to 350 feet. So for every 10 feet, that's a story. So 35 stories or so on Van Ness, which, you know, we see buildings now on South Van Ness, Mission and Van Ness that are taller than that. We're anticipating housing at 400 plus feet at Market and Van Ness. On Upper Market Street, we go a bit taller. At the corner of Van Ness in Market, we have some height increases around BART stations in this area of this city, like Balboa and Glen Park. We do some extra heights there too. Not a ton of opportunity sites necessarily in those neighborhoods, but the ability to go a bit taller there. And then outside of these corridors, where we generally have what we call residential zoning, R zoning, you know, there are things like RH1 or RH2. So that generally means you can only build one unit out in many parts of the Sunset, or 2 units. The Richmond has some RH3. What we do there is basically we control for the height. You can build 40 feet, which is the current height. Control for the bulk, like the rear yard, you can't cover your entire building. But again, we provide flexibility, and that's called density decontrol, and that's most of that kind of gray area. We say, you know, you can build a 4-plex there, you can build a 6-plex. We also allow corner lots, which is kind of allowed today, although you gotta jump through a bunch of hoops. 60 feet on corner lots, 40 feet on interior lots in those R districts. But we're not gonna control for the number of units. Does that mean you're gonna
60
get?
feet on all corner lots
Yeah,
in those
all corner,
districts?
yeah.
Okay.
And that's, it kind of already exists. Joel and Gardio passed a bill that allows it. There's some hoops you have to jump through, like you have to own it for a year, it may have to be rent control, I can't remember. But we're trying to simplify those rules because people can't even follow them. To say, here's the building form we wanna see, you could build within that building form. Do we expect people on a typical 25 by 100 foot block to build like a 10-unit building? No, it's probably more like a duplex or a 4-plex. It's kind of the classic housing style we see in many other places in the city, in the Hayden, Noe Valley. It's a good housing type that accommodates families and others. So, you know, that's what we want to see in the R districts. And again, do we expect, you know, droves of people to come to the permit center, you know, when this gets passed, to say we're gonna tear down our single family home and build 3 units? No, but over time, we're hoping that there's more of that. And there are single family homes, and there are quads, and there are duplexes, and maybe on corner lots, there are 6-plexes, because we think that kind of small, mid-sized apartment, you know, complex is good and could accommodate additional San Franciscans.
Awesome. I would be inclined to open up the floor now that we've done a bit of an intro. Does that sound
Sure.
good?
Questions are good.
And is Luis, okay, we have, great, Mike. I think first hand up was right next to you. Yeah? And maybe say your name and what neighborhood you're from. So that might
I live in the Richmond district, and my name is Patty. And I just wondered what's going on with the empty places downtown, the empty office buildings. There was
Yeah.
a lot of talk that to reinvigorate the downtown area, they were going to convert some of the older ones into housing.
Yep.
Is that happening?
It is, you know, the city would love for it to happen. We've passed a bunch of rule changes to allow it to happen. So basically, you could come in today, the zoning always allowed housing downtown. Office tended to be more lucrative, so people did office as a use. But if you read our downtown plan, it wants a mix of residential and office. So you could come in tomorrow and pretty much over the counter get a permit to convert your office building to residential. We'll waive your rear yard requirement, we'll waive any parking requirements or bike parking. We've even passed rules that, like, on the transfer tax on the first sale, you don't have to pay. We're looking at like putting tax increments, so your future increase in property tax will be like put back to the project. It's just very hard to, you know.
There's just
so-
no rush to do that.
Well, I don't think there's a rush, like there's vacant buildings, it's just costly to do it. So where it's been done at scale, like in parts of New York City, there aren't a ton of places, Chicago did a little bit of it. Los Angeles, I don't know how much they've done, but, I don't know, yeah, but it's usually come with like subsidies from the city, these tax incentives to actually do it, and the city's doing it, the state passed a law to allow for it to happen, so we would love to see it. It's generally more historic buildings that are gonna do it, that have operable windows, that it'll work, but we're with you, we would love to see it, and we're trying to make it happen, like it would actually implement what we wanna see in our downtown plan.
With beard in the way back.
Hey, you know, thrilled to see the episode. Oh, I'm Mike.
We like to call it a rezoning.
Thrilled to see the rezoning on the west side. I think a lot of us who live on the east side have chosen to live in a place that is denser and would like to see that density increase. And I'm kind of bummed to see that there's literally nothing done in our neighborhoods. What's behind that?
You mean on the eastern side of the city?
Yeah.
Because we've done a lot of work in the eastern. Oh, Bernal Heights, all right, yeah. I'm scared of Bernal Heights. Where? Have you been to, I've sat through commission hearings and people are angry about stuff that's happening in Bernal Heights. So maybe I have PTSD, there's like Bernal Heights design criteria and stuff like that. But we basically, yeah, and we've received this question too. I mean, we've done a lot of zoning in on the eastern side of the city. You see the results, whether it's Mission Bay or, 3rd Street and Dog Patch. There's the, south of Market, there's a lot of housing that's been built on the eastern side of the city. But the state did draw this kind of well-resourced neighborhood map in, we wanted to lean into that. Like I said, we have not zoned in this area in 50 years, and it was a down zoning. So, it's been an opportunity, it's been talked about for decades, so we did want to focus here. And I think Bernal Heights and like Cortland, there are some opportunity sites and probably the height could be increased beyond 40 feet. So, it's a request we have received.
I mean, just given the housing goals we have, the housing element, it seems like
Yeah.
we'd be throwing everything at that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
To not do anything on the eastern side seems
Yeah.
insane to me.
Well, it's not nothing, like we've done a ton on the eastern side of the city.
So question though, if there's appetite from the mayor's office and from the board of supervisors to do this type of density decontrol,
Yeah,
could that density
Sure.
decontrol be rolled out throughout the city?
yeah, yes.
Is
I
that-
encourage you to write your supervisor and the mayor. This map could change, we could add places in the city. Like we have spent a couple years on this, talking to neighbors, talking to broader housing advocates. So it's tough to add additional geography, but, if there's the political will to do it, sure.
So I have another question. You mentioned that the zoning authority is something that the state has given to the city and delegated to you guys. There's a state law that I'm personally excited about, is the SB 79,
Yeah.
which is a lot more ambitious than this map along the transit corridors. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that that's going to happen, or how do you think that it will fit with this plan that you have here?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't reviewed all the details. I think it's similar to SB 50 that happened, that was proposed a couple years back. Like in principle, sure, I like to see additional density around transit.
Glen Park to like 65 or
Yeah.
higher than that
Yeah.
for a lot of parts of Glen
Right.
Park that is 40 now. So
Right.
that's
I mean, what I'd like to see too is the state allow us to try to get to our numbers, right? And kind of embrace the mandates that the state has and, with the authority that the state has given us, try to get to the goals that they've set out before, they go forward and change a lot more of the rules. But I get why the state is doing it and, because jurisdictions are generally fighting the state on the state's push to rezone. I don't think San Francisco, or at least the planning department and the mayor, are doing that. I think we're embracing the state goals and trying to get to those targets that the state has set out. So I just think it's good policy that the state allows some of these processes to move forward before they start implementing kind of additional zoning. But, in theory, I think there are many jurisdictions who are gonna fight back on what the state is proposed, even the current housing element law. And I'd like to see the state, use their authority to make sure those jurisdictions, do what they are asked to do, rezone and build housing.
So question to extend on that, what are the next couple of steps like for this? So You mentioned that, well, you haven't mentioned the deadline for getting this adopted, but what's the process of feedback? When do we need to adopt this? What happens if this doesn't go through? And then, yeah, like, what are the ways that people can get engaged? For those of you who don't get your questions answered tonight.
You can come next week to the Planning Commission. It's a very exciting hearing. Noon in City Hall on the 4th floor, and voice your support or recommendations. You know, it's a good time for the Bernal crew to stay up zone foreman. Talk to us. You can write us, send emails to the commissioners, you can write your supervisor. Generally, this process has to be done by the end of the year. I think we have till January 31st of next year, technically, to get this done. Seems like a long time, but the process to actually, we have to write the legislation. The Planning Commission is gonna have a couple hearings on this and other issues like tenant protections and small business. Or how are we gonna help small business through this process? So that'll happen over the next couple months till the summer. Hopefully the commission will approve this when the summer is through and kick it to the board. The board will have some hearings at its land use committee, and then the full board will take it up and approve it, hopefully. So, but they, in each portion of this, there could be changes. The planning commission could make changes, the board of supervisors could make changes in committee, or the full board could make changes.
Next question.
Yep, hi, I'm James, I live in District 7. It seems that a lot of the map focuses primarily on the muni lines that exist already. Why wasn't more attention paid to streets that maybe parallel a muni line? For example, if you live 1 block away from Gary, or 2 blocks away from Ocean Ave like I do, you may be closer to a muni stop than people who live on those respective streets.
Yeah. I mean, we were gonna go from 65 feet on a corridor to 120 feet, but the board has the ability to do that, the planning commission has the ability to do that. But again, I think this is aggressive controls because we've changed the zoning years ago. You can generally build a building that's 2 times, 3 times that height limit on a lot using state density bonus. So, it's powerful and it's exactly what it says. It gives you a density bonus by basically saying you're gonna do 15% affordable housing on site. That's our requirement already, is 15% affordable housing. So basically you get this bonus just by complying with the city requirements. And most projects on the eastern side of the city use density bonus. On the western side of the city, where we currently control for density, it's harder to use. Like we say you can only do 10 units on a lot, you can generally only get twice that, or 50% more is 15 units. So density bonus works better on the eastern side of the city. We're kind of accounting for density bonus in the rezoning map, and I know this gets kind of confusing. But on Geary, like where there's an 85-foot height limit, you can get there 2 ways. You can use the underlying zoning, which is 50 feet, use density bonus, get to 85 feet, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Or you can use what we call our local program, just to get immediately to 85 feet. So we're kind of giving sponsors 2 paths to get to the heights on this map, through density bonus or through our local program.
Hi, I'm Tia. I live in the northeastern quarter
I
of
know
the
you,
city.
Tia.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for being here tonight. You mentioned affordable housing, 15%. Of the 36,000 units that you hope to see built at some point in time, what is the real target for affordable housing, and what are the guarantees that we're going to hit affordable housing targets?
Yeah, the state has targeted almost half of our RHNA goal. So half of the 80,000 plus units they want to see as being affordable.
Defined as?
They set various
Right.
AMI levels, but most of those we don't achieve through market rate housing. It's generally, nonprofit built, city supported affordable housing that targets specific income levels. So that's a huge number, right? 40,000 of those units the state would like to see affordable. Those projects, one, they need zoning changes to get there. One of the reasons we've seen not much affordable housing being built on the western side of the city is the zoning doesn't accommodate it. So we're changing this zoning not just for market rate projects, but for affordable housing projects as well, because they need the underlying zoning change to build those units. But what they also need is money, right? And resources from the city, tax credits, et cetera, to make these projects work. There was a bond, there was a regional bond that was being proposed so that you know, counties around the bank would pass a tax, an additional property tax to fund some of that affordable housing. We've generally been good in San Francisco about passing bonds and whatnot to fund affordable housing. The city's general fund supports some of the affordable housing, but you know, back in the day when redevelopment was around, a lot of tax increment was used to fund affordable housing. But funding is the biggest issue in order to achieve the 40,000 units of affordable housing. There are some good projects happening now that are kind of middle income housing projects. There's one on Sutter, 1101 Sutter. There's another one on Daharo that are getting to like 80% AMI income, the income levels, and without city subsidies. Like they're doing it with a series of tax credits and other state resources. So that's promising to get at some of our affordable goals. But funding is really the problem to get to our affordable numbers.
Hi, Director Hillis. My name is Bob Ack. I live in the Outer Richmond. Just a quick anecdote. I live in a building that was built in 1983, where Playland at the Beach used to be, and I'm so grateful that it's 4 stories and it's 100 units, and the kind of controls that used to exist aren't there now. And myself and so many of my neighbors wouldn't be able to call the city home if my building wasn't built. So I'm looking forward, and I'm very happy with this map for the most part. But my question revolves around the 82,000 number that Rena, blah, blah, blah. More than half of that number is ostensibly being met by the city pointing to things that have been approved in the past by the department and by the Board of Supervisors, entitled, and saying, we're gonna make sure those get built. And the one that's on my mind is Park Merced, which was approved in 2011. And I just don't understand how this map isn't working to be even more aggressive, considering that Park Merced proposal, the group that owns it, it got put into receivership.
Right.
Like, what can we do to encourage the department and the city? No, I know that it's not finalized and all that, this is a draft, but like, what can we do to make this even more aggressive to account for what I'm expecting is gonna happen, which is some of the things that the city is pointing out in the pipeline are going to fall through and fail.
Right. One, I would say, it's great that we have a pipeline of over 70,000. Like, we should consider that an asset, that we have 70,000 units in the pipeline to be built. We shouldn't necessarily say, oh, that's enough. We don't need to rezone, or we don't need to aggressively rezone because we have a pipeline. But a pipeline is good. Like, those are 70,000 units that somebody's paid for an entitlement to get, that are entitled, that, you know, even though the Park Merced.
When can we see them built?
I'd love to see them built. I mean,
When?
I don't know, it's the economy that's driving a lot of this, but
It's not.
of course it is, like,
We need the permissions.
Let him speak.
But again, projects that get approved through this zoning are gonna, it's not like they're gonna get approved and immediately start construction. They will be the next pipeline project, right? So we constantly need tens of thousands of units kind of proposed in varying portions of our pipeline if we're gonna actually get housing built. We wanna quicken that pace, that projects move from being proposed to actually built. The mayor's put forward Permit SF to try to reform post-entitlement. The state's reformed entitlement processes. Again, that project on Howard Street, which we approved in a matter of months, that's 70 stories, I think we approved it a year ago, you know, but they haven't moved forward because of economic conditions. We can point to project after project that, because of construction costs increasing, rents that are high, that kind of aren't where they needed to be, tariffs that aren't moving forward. But we've seen housing gets built cyclically. When the market kind of comes back and housing gets, it's always been the case. We got upswings where a lot of housing gets built and proposed. We have times where there isn't a crane in the sky. We're at that point now, but I'm confident in San Francisco. People wanna live here, people wanna be here. We're already seeing housing, you know, the vacancy rates decreasing throughout the city. We're seeing project sponsors come back and are interested in sites. that have been kind of sitting around. We're seeing project sponsors buy entitlements that exist today. So I'm confident we'll get projects from our pipeline built and then new projects proposed and built on the west side of the city. I'm confident that people will wanna live in San Francisco. We're not meeting our housing needs, and so the only way to do that is build, and project sponsors, I think, will build if the zoning is there.
So tell us a little bit more about Permit SF and like what can the city do to make the permitting, entitlement, and review process cheaper and faster?
To make it certain, you know, make it so there isn't a lot of discretion in that process. And again, I think the state has been a great partner in that, in doing that. There isn't as much discretion to get to, if you propose today a project, you utilize a ministerial pathway like SB 423, you'll generally get your project approved, entitled, then you gotta go through a building process to get it approved, and we've all heard stories about kind of how the building department works with other permitting agencies, and that's where the mayor is focused, this kind of post-entitlement process and getting that housing approved in a matter of months instead of years, so there's certainty in that process. And you know, if you're proposing a code compliant project, it will get built.
Awesome. I think the mic's over there.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. So my question's about occupancy limits within the dwelling unit. So I'm sure you're familiar, like San Francisco has this crazy law where like no more than 5 roommates can live together in a dwelling unit. So you can have like a 6-bedroom unit, but like 1 room has to remain vacant by law. So my question is like, would you be supportive of changing that, or is there any conversation around?
Yeah. We don't have a division at planning that's going out hunting people down who like I can't remember. I don't think it's in.
They can evict. Actually, they do.
Yeah.
So
no, and I think there's a supervisor who's interested in changing that, who has started to talk to us. I frankly, somebody brought this up to me. I didn't even know it was in our our planning code. I don't know the rationale why it's there necessarily, but yeah, we should necessarily get into those weeds on housing.
I think there's a cluster of questions over here, and given that we're tight on time, I'm gonna ask that we pass them out, or actually, let's just shout them out, and I'll batch them up together. So let's get like you, and you. So start with your question. Yes.
What is the strength of CEQA now, and depending on the strength, how can we kill it further?
Opinionated question.
Yeah.
Question from
I mean, you could say, someone could pass a law that says if you're proposing a project that's compliant with the city zoning, it doesn't need to go through CEQA. Like again, we do CEQA when we propose this rezoning. I mean, we do it at the housing element. We've got to update it when the zoning map gets approved. And then when individual projects come in, there's environmental review through that. It doesn't make a ton of sense. And again, the state has made strides, so projects could come in, use a ministerial pathway. There is no CEQA required.
Okay, we're gonna, because we're tight on time.
So it should be, it should probably be done when we rezone, and then not done if projects are compliant with the zoning.
Quick question, historic preservation buildings
Yes.
have always been protected. What's gonna happen under the new zoning?
Yeah.
No, not rezoning.
Rules haven't changed, right? So, but I think the city's gotta be more diligent. We protected buildings by kind of calling them historic, but not designating them as landmarks in Article 10 and 11. So we were relying on CEQA to kind of be the roadblock to preserve them. So if you wanted to tear down what we call a Category A, it's not listed, we'd use CEQA to say like, oh, you can't tear that down, you gotta go through an environmental review process. So if you use some of the state laws, you may be able to tear down a building that we all think probably should be protected. So in order to truly protect them, we have to landmark them and put them into Article 10, 11, and we should for great historic buildings.
Why can't we just build up everywhere?
I think this gets to that. We haven't built on this, we haven't seen units built on the west side of the city. So, a lot of this rezoning is mimicking what the zoning is on the eastern side of the city. So we can build on Geary Boulevard and on Lombard.
If you have a fuck ton of houses, then you know that's supply and demand. Like it gets cheaper, the houses get cheaper.
Well, I'm with you, yeah.
Okay, we're gonna only have time for like 1 or 2 more
We
questions.
should end on
so-
fuck time.
Got out to fuck time.
I'm Emily. I live in the inner Richmond, and I don't
Love
know if
the
this is-
enrichment.
Yeah, me too. So I moved there 5 years ago, and there are so many storefronts that have been shuttered the entire 5 years that I've lived there on Clement. And I'm just curious about the requirement to have commercial on the ground floor. It seems like there's already so many shuttered. I mean, I don't know if that's like a super central issue, but I'm just curious about that requirement.
Yeah, I mean, many of our commercial corridors are doing great, right? And they're filling vacant, there's more vacancies downtown, they're doing well. I think we need to tweak our rules to, one, allow that process to happen a lot easier, and we already have. Like, you used to have to send out, if a restaurant wanted to change to a bookstore, it had to send out notice to like everybody within 300 feet, and there was that famous case like where the ice cream store got DR'd by tons of folks. So we have to make it easier to fill a space and more flexible on the types of uses that go in there. Like Noe Valley had a restaurant ban. There are other places that you need a CU for bars, or the rules were kind of all over the map depending on where you were. So we want active uses on the ground floor. I think everybody loves neighborhoods that are walkable and active, and we wanna maintain that. But we may have to be a little more flexible on what's allowed on the ground floor.
George Dale. I live in the Lower Haight, and I'm incredibly excited about this map. I'm in a project right now. I'm trying to add a floor to our building, and it's underneath the height limit. But we've been told that the design guidelines say that our parapets need to be aligned to the buildings next to us. And so I'm curious about, as we look at this map, this is great, but if things like design guidelines are going to get in the way of like matching parapets, how are we going to see these come to fruition?
Yeah, I don't know your case, but again, there are. That's why we came up with objective design standards, so that it's clear what the rules are, and we're not kind of deciding on parapets project by project necessarily.
And are those new?
We want a fuck ton of parapets.
And with that, I think we're going to end. Yep, he's unfortunately going to be kicking us out. But thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. Come here tomorrow. Tomorrow's event is free. We talk about rent lease rules, so save your money.
Thanks, buddy. Steyer's on now. It's April the 3rd. April the 3rd. Pretty early on in the process. Another full house. Manny's had a hell of a week on housing, and it's I'm loving it. That was Rich Hillis, my buddy.